With how popular video games have become in the last couple decades, it's become more common for franchises to be adapted into movies or TV shows. As you know by now, these tend to fail more than actually succeed at properly adapting whatever game they're based on. The problem comes down to the studios not caring about the source material or the game itself not needing to be adapted at all. But usually it's a mix of both. There's so many games that are pretty much already movies getting adapted when there's other franchises that deserve some recognition. That's my issue with games like The Last of Us, Death Stranding, or the new God of War, because they care more about being pseudo-movies than actually being video games. I can already see the responses to that sentence. There's not really a reason to adapt any of these games, well, aside from the obvious one. For today's video, I felt like going over some games that I think would fit better for the silver screen. In my list, I'm not going to include any adaptations that have already been announced. And I also won't include any games that I personally haven't played yet. If there's any games that you think should be made into a film or series, feel free to let me know in the comments. Here are the games that I think actually deserve adaptations. Hotline Miami is a series I wish I could experience all over again. It has one of my favorite interconnected stories when it comes to video games. Hotline Miami 1 was pretty straightforward in its premise. It's 1980s Miami and you play as Jacket, who consistently gets mysterious phone calls that send him to places to brutalize members of the Russian mafia. The details surrounding Jacket and the other characters wouldn't be revealed until Hotline Miami 2: Wrong Number. This is what introduced most of the game's lore, which made the narrative much more complex. Wrong Number provided context to the events of the first game, much better characterization, and an even more heart-wrenching story. We learned that Jacket and Beard were actually war buddies, and that the phone calls from the first game were from the 50 Blessings, an organization made to counter the influx of Russian mafia entering Miami. The sequel introduced several new characters that each have their own impact on the plot, including Pardo, the Ghost Wolves, the Writer, Henchman, Jake, the Sun, and the fans. I think the best approach would be an animated series because a Hotline Miami show needs to have the same visual aesthetics of the games. And of course it needs to have the game's soundtrack. Having the two games to pull from, I think it's a good opportunity to piece together a lot of the events in the story, since Wrong Number confused a lot of people due to it being told out of chronological order. I'm not saying the show should be told completely in chronological order, but the stories could be tied together to make the narrative more seamless. What stands out to me the most about these games is how well the characters are written, and I would say Jacket is up there among my favorite video game protagonists. And I would love to see him and the rest of the cast portrayed in a cinematic format. Not just the characters, but the action as well. With a diverse amount of weapons, characters, and locations, we could get some incredibly well animated fight scenes under the right studio. But what most intrigues me is how an animated show would handle the psychological aspects of the games. There are moments that range from psychedelic to straight up horrific. It makes me think of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which also had a vibrant art style and wasn't afraid of telling a dark and violent narrative. The Hotline Miami games have an air of mystery, brutality, and personal turmoil, and they all need to be captured to properly adapt this story. Sonic has 3 movies, Mario's getting another one, and now Legend of Zelda is getting its own movie. Sega and Nintendo's mascots are taking over the big screen, but there's still one gaming icon that still hasn't gotten their own film. Mega Man. It's about time this guy gets his own movie. He has like a million games, so it's not like there's no source material to pull from. So I know what some of you might be thinking. Secret Level already had a Mega Man episode, so why is he included? First of all, I had Mega Man on the list for this video months before Secret Level even came out. Plus, Netflix hasn't said anything about that Mega Man adaptation for years, so I think it's safe to say it's probably cancelled. If anything, I'd say Secret Level proves my point that Mega Man could work as a movie. That episode literally felt like the first 10 minutes to what could make a pretty good film. With how many games Mega Man has, they could easily follow the plot of the classic games, Legends, or even the X series. Every game is the constant battle for Mega Man to keep humanity safe against Dr. Wily and being the only one who can do so. Aspects of the story like this could be expressed even more in a movie format. If any of them were to be adapted, it would be non-stop action for the whole runtime. The simple loop of going through levels, fighting master robots, and gaining their powers would add some variety to the constant action. Plus, if they want to do sequels, they can bring in other characters like Proto Man, Rush, or Bass later down the line. The best way to adapt Mega Man would be to follow what Secret Level did and just make an animated movie. And for the love of God, don't fill the cast with celebrity voice actors. We don't need Chris Pratt or Tom Holland voicing Mega Man. As long as they play their cards right, we might have as many Mega Man movies as there are games. On second thought, I don't think we need that many. When I was searching for games that haven't been adapted yet, there were quite a handful of games that could make for a pretty compelling TV show. More specifically, a compelling crime thriller. That's right, I'm talking about Payday. If you have any doubts that this could work, just look at the opening of The Dark Knight. That whole sequence was pretty much a Payday level. Now imagine that one scene being made into a series. You and your team scope out the place of interest, decide on how to approach it, and then execute the plan. There's a large variety of heists, locations, and contractors to choose from. You have banks, smash and grabs at jewelry stores, hijacking armored trucks, a Breaking Bad reference, and even a whole ass mall. I could easily see every episode being its own heist, with the main group accepting jobs from different contractors. When it comes to characters, they could use the original 4 from the first game, but Payday 2 brought in more characters that could be introduced in the show. We could also have a subplot involving the police trying to track down the main group. That way we get to see both sides of the conflict. There's so many options for how they could handle a Payday show. The thing about these games is there's not exactly a concrete story, it's just the 4 characters accepting jobs and getting them done. That means the writers can take some liberties and craft their own story while staying true to the games. They could even personalize the characters so they could each have their own arcs throughout the show. It would be interesting to see what made these characters who they are and why they chose to pursue a life of crime. I suppose that would be better than messing up a story that was already established, which tends to happen a lot with video game adaptations. While I was writing the portion of this video, I found out there was apparently a Payday 2 web series back when the game came out. I don't know if it was actually good, but it shows that the series has the potential to work in live action. Let's be honest here, every horror game that's been adapted to film has never hit the mark. Resident Evil, for example. Not a single one of those movies ever tried to be accurate to the source material. But there's another horror franchise that could really get under people's skin if it was made correctly. Dead Space. I'm already aware of the animated movies that came out a while back, but I think I speak for everybody when I say we need an adaptation of the first game. I wouldn't even mind those prequel comics getting adapted since those were written surprisingly well. It could be a movie or a high-budget miniseries, I personally don't mind. I just think it needs to happen and have the right people behind it, especially since the franchise is pretty much dead again for God knows how long. Remember when John Carpenter, the guy who made The Thing, said he wanted to make a Dead Space movie and EA did nothing? Well, I do. Even after the remake came out, he said he still wants to make it. This series has some really compelling lore, and that's because it's a perfect example on how to handle cosmic horror. The story of Dead Space takes place in a universe where humans have started populating planets outside of Earth, and planet cracking is done by space stations to retrieve resources in order to survive. An object called the Marker was discovered on a planet by one of the stations, and their attempts to experiment with the Marker turned everyone on the Ishimura into the creatures we know as necromorphs. The main character is Isaac Clarke, and the game follows his survival across the Ishimura in search of his girlfriend Nicole so they can escape the station. Over time, the Marker causes those affected by it to go insane, as well as cause hallucinations, and Isaac is no exception. With the remake having a more cinematic approach to the story, not only does it prove an adaptation is possible, but that it would be pure nightmare fuel if handled faithfully. The necromorphs are some of the most terrifying enemies in video games, and it would be incredible to see them brought onto the big screen. The only drawback in dealing with the necromorphs is they would most likely be CGI, but one can imagine how amazing they would look if done by practical effects. Recent movies like Alien Romulus show that practical effects can still work, but like I said before, it just depends on who would be adapting Dead Space and how much they care about the franchise. Dead Space has such a compelling story behind it that it deserves a chance to be explored outside of video games more. If done right, a Dead Space movie or TV show could be one of the best video game adaptations, if not one of the best horror entries of all time. In just the past couple years, I've gotten into franchises that I thought I would never play, one of those being the Soulsborne series. In the span of a few months, I went through Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 1, Bloodborne, and Sekiro. Aside from the gameplay, one of my favorite aspects of this series is how they implement visual storytelling. There's not a lot of dialogue in these games, but when there is, it's usually cryptic and leaves you with more questions than answers. One of the main sources of lore you can find are in the item descriptions. It makes you want to learn more about these worlds and the characters by piecing together the information given to you. That's why if any of these games are to ever be adapted, whoever's making it has to understand how the games convey their story. I think if such an adaptation were to be made, Miyazaki should be a producer or at least in some position where he has creative input. From Software are the only ones that truly understands their games, so I personally wouldn't trust a random screenwriter to handle a franchise this big. Let's say for example Dark Souls was made into a show. There's obviously not going to be much dialogue. The protagonist will mainly be exploring and fighting enemies while occasionally dying and overcoming the challenges in their path. And I think the death mechanics can still be integrated into the story if it's explained well. The Secret Level episode based on New World explores this, since the main character in that dies over and over again while still getting stronger. I'm sure some people might say there's no stakes in the story if you already know the main character can't die and will just come back to life. But one of the main messages behind the Souls games is to learn from your mistakes and not give up. And the concept of going hollow in Dark Souls is a metaphor for this. If you've played Dark Souls 1, you already know how the NPCs remind your character not to go hollow and to push through the challenges in your way. No matter which From Software game gets adapted, these themes have to be explored in order to feel truthful to the gameplay. There's been rumors of Dark Souls or Sekiro getting their own animes, and even Bloodborne or Elden Ring getting their own movies. I don't think the stories of these games could fit in a 2-hour movie, so I think a TV show would be the best format to go with, whether it's live action or animated. A good inspiration for a Soulsborne animated series would be the works of Genndy Tartakovsky. Primal is a perfect example of visual storytelling since there's not even dialogue until late in the second season. Even episodes of Samurai Jack could go for long periods of time without a single word. This is how an adaptation of a From Software game should be done, so if we do end up getting one in the future, hopefully the writers understand what gave these games their identity. After all the brutal and more mature games I've included in the list, I thought it would be nice to end the video with a more wholesome choice in mind. And it's a fairly recent game that's still getting support. Dave the Diver. The main appeal of this game is catching and farming seafood which you help serve at your friend's restaurant. The fish you catch and the dishes you serve help determine how much money you're pulling in each night. But there's more to the game than just catching fish and managing the restaurant. The story follows Dave as he and his friends discover an underwater civilization which they decide to help while studying them. This leads Dave to face off against sea creatures that are essentially kaijus, like giant squids, a colossal mantis shrimp with boxing gloves, and much more. The sea life also isn't the only threat, as Dave deals with a poacher named John Watson throughout the story. The characters in this game have so much personality and life to them that they all feel unique. The brief animated cutscenes even feel anime inspired, and I can't help but feel that would be a perfect fit for a game like this. Dave the Diver's story could easily work in an episodic format, with each episode showcasing the challenges Dave has to face while diving and managing the restaurant. A TV show would also be a great opportunity to flesh out the dynamics between Dave and his colleagues. It will eventually lead into the Sea Village portion of the game, and that's even more story content that can be explored. Out of all the games I've covered here today, I feel like Dave the Diver would be the easiest to adapt with how accessible the story is. This game also has plenty of DLC, so it's possible those expansions could be brought into the story of the show. Well, maybe not the Godzilla DLC, as awesome as that would be. And that pretty much wraps up my list. I know there's been a gap since my Silent Hill 2 review, but that's because I'm working on a few different videos at once. I'll keep you guys updated on the progress for future videos in my community posts, so keep an eye out for those. My next video might be done around June since it's probably going to be my longest video yet. Which games do you hope get made into a movie or show? And how would you make it if you were in charge? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you liked today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.